unite and level up, bringing together the whole of this incredible United Kingdom, taking us forward, unleashing the potential of the whole country.
Hi folks, welcome to another edition of People's PMQs.
We'll work flat out to give this country the leadership it deserves, and that work begins now.
Welcome to another edition of People's Question Time, and I'm very, very glad that you've joined me today because I hugely enjoy these sessions. It's my chance to hear directly from people about their views, how they think the government has been helping or not helping, and what we can do. And clearly, this country has been going through a tremendously difficult time over the past 3 or 4 months, and by a huge national effort, we are getting that virus down. We are slowly beginning to get our lives back to normal. That's thanks to the fantastic efforts of all of you, of the British people. So I want to thank you very much. And I obviously want to reassure you that we are going to continue in our balanced way to safely and cautiously to reopen our economy and get things moving as fast as we can, whilst staying alert and saving lives. So thanks all for tuning in. Let's go straight to the first question. We've got Justin in Lancaster. Justin, let's hear from you.
Hi, good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to speak to you. So my question today is that inevitably COVID-19 has affected the national economy. However, for recent graduates such as myself, graduate schemes and placements have been axed or delayed, leading to an additional period of uncertainty. For recent graduates such as myself, what additional support can the government give when entering a rather jobless market for potentially the biggest economically hit year in living memory, and also one of the greatest crises since World War II, as you mentioned yourself?
Well, Justin, you're so right, and I really feel for all graduates now who are looking out and wondering what's going to happen. I do think, Justin, that actually you have great prospects ahead of you. Graduates in this country overwhelmingly do very, very well. We've seen that before the crisis began, we had unemployment down to record lows. We had people doing, universities, I think, are a fantastic thing for people. But what we need to do now is invest in young people. So the 16 to 24-year-old group, that's the immediate graduate group, going to be eligible for the Kickstarter scheme, £2 billion scheme, which will pay you at least the living wage for 6 months to get a job. There's a big new apprenticeship bonus that we're putting in, so to give every employer the incentive to hire apprentices at least, so for a £2,000 apprenticeship bonus, and many other schemes to employ high-skill, high-wage people. Our vision is to keep this economy moving as fast as we possibly can, given the difficulties that we're in, and that's why a couple of weeks ago I set out or last week actually, the speech in Dudley, which was all about build, build, build. And then Rishi, the Chancellor, followed that up with the jobs piece. And the two are the same. We're going to build, build, build to create jobs for the future. And what we want to do is create an environment in which our businesses and our enterprises feel confident to invest in the UK for the long term and create high-skilled jobs. So, and that's a 600 billion. If you look at overall what we're going to do with roads, with rail, with housing, with technology, putting in super fast broadband, this is a massive, massive investment in the future of our country, and it's meant to trigger, and it will trigger business confidence and business investment, and that is what I hope will really drive graduate prospects in the short, medium and long term. But in the short term, Justin, those are some of the things that we're doing. So the Kickstarter scheme I would single out.
Of course. Now, obviously, the Kickstarter scheme is welcomed, that the Chancellor announced. It's obviously welcomed by graduates such as myself. However, it's also maybe inevitable that employers may not be able to keep on their temporary employees after the 6-month period. And it can be argued by critics and also by other political commentators that this may just delay the inevitable of mass unemployment as we've seen during the pandemic. So what can the government do for the long-term stage to prevent a return of the mass unemployment after the 6-month stage, should businesses not be viable to keep on their employees afterwards?
Well, Justin, again, I mean, a very important point. But I think what we're trying to do is get things moving now in the really difficult bit. But then, as far as we possibly can, Justin, get back to life as close to normal as possible. So, we've got a sort of 9-month plan really to get the whole, which I'll be saying a lot more about it next week, really to get the whole economy back to as close as the status quo ante-COVID, if you like, so that we're really able to move forward. And if you think about coronavirus, it's been quite incredibly difficult for something like the UK economy, which relies so heavily on the propinquity of human beings to one another. We're a brilliant, dynamic, creative economy. We rely on people being able to interact at a human and a personal level with each other, and COVID sort of forbids that. So it's terrible for a creative, the creative culture, media sectors, the arts, hospitality, restaurants, all business services, all the things in which the UK is miles ahead. Academic life, we're miles and miles ahead. All those, we face particular restrictions because of COVID. So the faster we can get back to the status quo ante, the better. Now, we're always going to have to be careful, because until we get a vaccine, it's going to be difficult. But we can get there, and we will get. So the long term. So Kickstarter is there. All the other, 160 billion pound package of investment we've already put in to jobs and incomes. There'll be more to come. Huge package of investment in infrastructure to create the long-term, medium long-term platform for growth and investment. But the best, the reason I'm a conservative, I believe in the end, you've got also to stimulate business, the private sector, enterprise to come in and create and invest as well. That's absolutely critical, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Of course. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Justin. Can we go to Bethany in Crewe? Hi, Bethany.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
My question is, with childcare settings struggling to survive and rates of postnatal depression through the roof, how are women and new mums in particular being considered as part of the country's recovery? I'm a new mum myself on maternity leave, and there's thousands of women and men in my situation who don't feel like they've been included in the current package of support. In fact, there's been a petition signed by 228,000 people for the extension of maternity leave.
For the extension of paternity leave, Bethany. Well, we want
paternity,
paternity, absolutely. Well,
yeah.
We've absolutely determined to support childcare for both mums and dads. So we've got a package of 30 hours free childcare a week, and I know that in the current circumstances that won't feel like much because of the obligations that everybody has, particularly if they can't get their kids back into school. That's why it's so important that as far as we can, we get pupils, kids back into school as fast as possible. Now, early years reception, year 1 and year 6, should be going back now, and I really hope that they do go back. We've got, I think, we've got in some years now about half have gone back, but it's not enough, and I want to see more pupils who can go back going back now. It's also absolutely crucial that we get absolutely everybody back in September, because Bethany, the thing that's really upsetting and worrying about the situation is that, you know, it's the pupils who need to be in school most who are being currently left behind for one reason or another, and often it's pupils from families that are more deprived that aren't sending their kids that aren't going back to school now. So we need to get more kids back into school now before the holidays, and we need everybody to be back in September. And on the overall childcare package, we are doing more, and we will continue to do more. And I will study the petition that you mentioned. Is it for extension of both maternity and paternity leave? I will study.
And adoption leave, yeah. The House of Commons Petition Committee have
Yes.
held various expert review sessions with experts from a host of charities and organisations. And overwhelmingly, the evidence that has been collected, the scientific evidence, supports this extension, along with a whole host of other measures, such as mental health support,
Right.
expansion of health visitor services, and there's a whole host of measures in that report that have been suggested to help people in my situation, because people coming off maternity with parents of 9 to 12-month-olds.
How old is your children, Bethany, or your child? What's your situation?
She's 8 months old.
8 months old. Wow, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is, and it's been incredibly more difficult with the usual support that people get on maternity leave removed. So grandparents, wider family, health visitors, classes, groups, all that's been removed.
Yeah, of course.
And parents up and down the country are reporting mental health issues in the children as well as in themselves. A lot of them are presenting with separation anxiety, and the cost of that over the years has got to be so much higher.
Absolutely right.
Than the cost of extending maternity leave and putting in the help now, the help that is needed right now for these mums and these babies.
Yes, look, Bethany, I totally get that, and I think that the point you make about the difficulty of accessing help because of lockdown and the pressures that people have faced because of lockdown, and that is absolutely right, and I've seen evidence of that across the country, and you know that's why we've had really to work so hard to get the virus down to the stage where, you know, we can allow people to visit their older relatives. We now got to the stage where, you know, households can you can have two households together indoors, or again more outdoors, and that should help. But, you know, this isn't going to be properly fixed until we've got back to what I was saying to Justin, a life where it's much easier to interact as we normally did. And on your specific point about the pressures on mental health, you know, everybody can see what's happened. I think, you know, I think some people have enjoyed lockdown. Some people have managed to cope very well. Some people have found it very stressful. And you know, I repeat my gratitude to people for what they've been through. But we are seeing reports of people who have experienced mental health pressures. And so throughout the crisis, we've been supporting mental health charities that have been helping people with the difficulties that they've experienced. Obviously, we've been dealing particularly with victims of domestic abuse, potential victims of domestic abuse in the home, but increasing our overall investment in mental health by about £12 billion. So all these things, you know, they're all phenomena that we've seen as a result of the coronavirus crisis, and we're absolutely doing our best to tackle them. Your point about extending maternity leave and the immediate payments that you're mentioning, I must confess to you, Bethany, I haven't had time to look at the arguments, but I will certainly do it.
Okay. Catherine McKinnell has put together a lot of excellent arguments.
Catherine McKinnell.
Yeah, the MP Catherine McKinnell.
Okay,
She's the head of the petitions committee.
Oh, terrific. Okay, thank you so much. I will definitely have a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we go to Jason in Kettering, please? Hi, Jason.
Yep. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. And my question to you is that basically my dad, who was on furlough during the pandemic, was unfortunately made redundant a couple of weeks ago, which would have been obviously before Wednesday's announcement by the Chancellor. So my question is there anything that the government can do to help reinstate employees who have been made redundant, during the pandemic, in order to maybe allow the employers to benefit from the Chancellor's announcement?
Yeah, well, that's because of course, Jason, your point is a really good one because the thing that Rishi did that was I thought very clever was to say that employers can get a bonus if they retain, but that won't apply to your dad at the moment, or not in the way that he needs. What type of job was he in?
He was doing manufacturing. He was a manufacturer for 27 years. He was doing conveyor manufacturing.
Right. Well, the best thing we can do for him, obviously, we're putting a lot of money into supporting people in all kinds of ways. But the best thing we can do for him is to get things moving again, get things moving for manufacturing industry and all parts of industry, and that's why I placed such stress last week on getting the UK economy going again. He will have access to support pro tem, but we will have to somebody who's in manufacturing is a massive asset to this country, and we need him back working as fast as we can, and that's why we've got a £600 billion package of investment in infrastructure and getting our economy moving. But Jason, I've got to say to you, I hope that we'll have as V-shaped a recovery as possible, but we simply can't be certain. There will be tough times ahead, and I'm very sorry for the experience your father is having, and we'll do everything we can to get him and your family through it as fast as we possibly can.
Lovely. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Can we go to Chris in Bideford, please?
Hi, good morning, Prime Minister.
Chris.
My question is, the news from the World Health Organization that COVID-19 may be transmissible via micro aerosol particles.
Yes.
Will be very worrying to vulnerable people who are already nervous about venturing back into shops and restaurants. Are you planning to expand the places and situations where face coverings will be mandatory? And is it possible they'll become mandatory in all places outside our own homes?
Thanks very much, Chris. Well, this is something that we've been talking about with SAGE, the advisory group on emergencies, the scientific advisory group on emergencies, right since the beginning when we first heard about this issue. And it's very interesting because in places like China or Taiwan or Far Eastern countries, they don't actually have mandatory, face coverings or mandatory face masks. What it's just part of the way they do things. Now, clearly, we don't have that culture here in the UK, and we have to think about how we make it happen and how we make it work. I think as we get the numbers down in the way that we have, and we really stamp out local outbreaks in the way that we are, I do think we need to be stricter in insisting that people wear face coverings in confined places where they are meeting people that they don't normally meet. So that's why it's mandatory already on public transport, and we're looking at ways of making sure that people really do have face coverings in shops, for instance, where there is a risk of transmission. I don't think that we're going to get to a world, Chris, where we're going to say everybody has to wear face coverings the whole time, everywhere. And I hope you wouldn't want that, because I don't think that is.
Not really. No.
I don't think that is medically indicated, actually. But you're right in what you say about the increasing. The balance of scientific opinion seems to have shifted more in favour of them than it was, and we're very keen to follow that. But to get back to what I was saying, to Justin and Bethany and others, the future for the country has got to be a world where we're managing the virus so effectively with local lockdowns, with test and trace, that we don't need, ultimately, and this is still some way off, we don't need to have some of these social distancing measures that make life so difficult for us all, and whether on public transport or in businesses and so on. So I do want to get back to a world where the British people feel able to shake hands again. It's how we operate. And it's that's what we're aiming for. But face coverings, yes, we increasingly think that we've got to be very insistent on, in confined places where you're meeting people that you don't normally come into contact with, transport, shops, wear a face covering.
Am I okay to ask another question?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's people's PMQs. It's absolutely.
Well,
actually, normally in House of Commons you don't get another go, but far away, please.
Well, I've actually got two. So, do you want a Laura Koonsberg type question?
Give a Laura Koonsberg both barrels.
Well, that's about China. I've got something more local, if you like.
Okay,
so,
go
on. Well, the local question is, over a year ago, Babcock Marine closed the shipyard in Appledore in North Devon.
I know, yeah.
I know that my MP, Sir Geoffrey Cox, has been trying to get the shipyard up and running again, but we haven't had much news of late. Prior to the closure, I am aware that they made 4 patrol vessels for the Irish Navy. They would seem ideally placed to make the same type of vessel for the Border Force. Have you got any plans to give them any contracts like that?
Yes, well, Chris, we are looking actively at what we can do to help Appledore. It's a great yard. It could have a great future, but I can't give you specific details about contracts that we're looking at for Appledore. I'll be happy to write to you about it, but I know that we have plans to build many more ships in the UK. We've got a whole shipbuilding strategy, and I'm acutely aware. And Sir Geoffrey has done a very, very good job of campaigning for the Appledore yard. So it's definitely on our list of priorities.
Okay, can I sneak in my China question?
The final, you got on, yeah.
I'm hearing on the news that there's a groundswell of opinion amongst your backbenchers that we should end Huawei's involvement in the 5G network. If it's suspected that their involvement in our infrastructure projects is a national security risk, should we be allowing state-owned companies from China to build our nuclear power stations?
Well, I want to be very clear. I'm not one of the world's natural sinophobes. Okay, I think China is a great country. It's a rising power. I think we need to engage with the Chinese people. I happen to think that the Chinese system of government is not one, obviously, whose methods we share, and we have our differences, our strong differences over what is happening in Hong Kong, for instance, and elsewhere. I want to engage with China. We're going to need to engage with China. On the other hand, we have to protect our critical national infrastructure. And there are ways of doing that in the nuclear sector. In the case of 5G, which is the issue in the case of 5G, there is a particular issue that is now caused by the US sanctions on the chips, and we'll have to find a way of addressing that, Chris. But I would love to tell you what that's going to be, but I really ought to tell the House of Commons first, if that's okay.
No problem.
If that's okay. Thanks very much. Thank you. Could we go to Aaron in Solihull, please?
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. As a student planning on starting university in September, what is the government doing to help universities plan for the complexities surrounding social distancing on campus and the financial toll this will inevitably have on the institutions?
Thanks, Aaron. Well, I think that universities are, first of all, it's been very, very difficult for the university sector, just as it has been for schools. And they've had to cope really by saying that they're going to do a lot of teaching online, on Zoom, as we are, and now. And actually, I think many of them have risen to that challenge very, very well. I'm very concerned that the sector should continue to receive the support it needs, and will do that. And I'm very concerned that it should be able to adapt. But in the end, and I'm afraid I'm going to slightly repeat an answer that you already have heard if you've been tuning into this whole thing. The best thing for universities is if they are able to get back to life as close to normal as possible, as fast as possible. I mean, what is a university? It's not only meeting brilliant academics who can instruct you, whether in a lecture or in a seminar, on Zoom or whatever. That's obviously an important thing, in the imparting of knowledge like that. But a university is also an incredible cyclotron of talent, isn't it? It's where brilliant young minds come together and want to ping off each other like subatomic particles, and you get the flash of an idea, and people meet for all sorts of, that's what a university is. And so to get our universities back to life, to get them really prospering again, they're a massive part of the UK economy. We need to get them back to physical propinquity. That's the key thing. So Aaron, we've all got to work at driving down that virus, staying alert, washing our hands. I mean, Chris is right to ask about aerosol particles and face coverings, but believe me, face coverings are nothing like as effective in stopping the spread of the virus as washing your hands. Washing your hands is really, 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 I mean, or so the scientists assure me, much more important as a precaution. Do all that, and I hope that great British universities will be back to life as normal. So that's my vision for it. University sector is also one of the great money earners for this country. We attract brilliant people from all over the world, and that's a good thing. Yes. And I'm proud of that. And by the way, we attract lots of Chinese students, and that's a great thing too. But before we can get back to that world, we have a long way to go, and we've got to get those numbers down. We've got to keep fighting it. I mean, if I look back 4 or 5 weeks ago, we probably had 1 in 400 people with the virus. A couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks, it was down to 1 in 2,200. It's now maybe 1 in 3,600 or so. It seems to be tapering off. It seems to be. But everybody can see what's happening in other countries around the world where people misinterpret the messages, people don't observe the guidance, and boom, you get spikes again. We can't have that in this country. We mustn't have that. So I want people to go back to work as carefully as possible. I think it's very important that people should be, going back to work if they can now. I think everybody's sort of taken the stay at home if you can. I think we should now sort of say, well, go back to work if you can, because I think it's very important that people should try to lead their lives more normally. I want to see more people feeling confident to use the shops, use the restaurants, get back into work, but only if we all follow the guidance. And that's how we'll get universities back.
Do you mind if I ask quick follow-up question?
Go on.
There were talks, at least in the media in early June, of having social bubbles within universities.
Yes.
Because obviously student accommodation, it's relatively small, cramped spaces. Will the government be publishing any further guidance for all universities on how social distancing will work in terms of students living on campus, or will it be up to the individual unis to decide?
Well, Aaron, we'll be wanting to get into the detail of how we can make that work, because, it will be one of the difficult things. Can you imagine opening up if you open up universities in that way with huge numbers of people meeting together? How is that going to affect the spread of the virus? We'll need to make sure that we do it that we help universities to do it in a secure way. I'd like to see universities coming back in the autumn along with schools. I mean, I want that to happen. It should happen, must happen. But we'll have to provide proper guidance, and we certainly will. On the bubbles idea, that's clearly what we're using for schools. We will be setting out guidance for how to make it work for universities as well. But we've got to get back to our studies. We can't afford to let young people miss out on their education.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Can we go to Kirsty in Fife, please?
Thank you, Prime Minister. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 17 years ago, and note that many people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes are being asked to return to work. With research showing that 1 in 3 COVID deaths in hospital were linked to people with diabetes, what are the government doing to support those at a higher risk who are not able to socially distance at work and their employer cannot offer a home working or a safe alternative?
Well, Kirsty, thanks very much. I'm sorry to hear about your condition and the need for shielding. Obviously, there's loads of people in the same position as you. So don't worry. We are going to look after you and make sure things we sort it out for you. Obviously, you're doing the right thing at the moment, and thank you for that. But the key thing is to keep the virus down so low that the risks of your contracting it are so greatly reduced that you don't have to fear anymore. That's what we want, and that's our objective. And I think when we think about the future and how we're going to suppose we can't get a vaccine, Kirsty, how are we going to suppose we can't get a vaccine, and I hope we will. The UK's leading in many ways in the hunt for a vaccine. We've got lots of good projects going, but you simply can't be certain it's going to happen. So for people who have particular vulnerabilities in the long term, we have to live with COVID. How are we going to make it work? And I think that one of the concepts that we're going to have to get used to is the idea that when there are outbreaks, certain groups will need particular shielding and particular protection. Do you see what I mean? So we don't. I don't want to do another national lockdown. It's something that obviously theoretically we have to keep in reserve, but big horizontal measures that affect the whole country. I think that because of the local approach that we're able to take, I think we're moving beyond that. But we also need to be looking particularly at measures to shield particular groups, whether they're people with diabetes or other vulnerabilities. And so that is really how we'll do it in the future. We'll try and look after you and others, not in a more targeted and more local way, I think is probably the best answer I can give you.
I don't know, you might be aware of Diabetes UK, their campaign, which I know that they've sent a petition into your government, which was to extend the furlough scheme for those at higher risk so that they don't need to choose between their health and their finances. Is that something which your government is going to consider?
Well, I think the trouble with extending the furlough scheme indefinitely is, if you extend it to November, then people will say, well, what about December? If you extend it to December, people will say, what about January? And I'm not certain that it's really the best thing. The best thing is to depress the incidence of the disease to such an extent that we can really protect everybody, and then take particular steps where necessary, where there are local outbreaks, to protect those with diabetes and other vulnerabilities. That's the best way forward. And I do think that the Chancellor's scheme, Rishi's £1,000 bonus to get employers to retain people rather than letting them go is the right way to deal with the furlough issue. Furlough just keep people in suspended animation when the best thing is to cautiously go back to work. That is the best thing. And for those who are shielded, we haven't reached, I stress, we haven't reached that stage yet, for those who are shielded. But for most people who can go back to work, my message now would be that if you can go back to work, then provided your company is obeying the guidelines, provided it's safe, then you should go back to work. But obviously that doesn't apply to those who are shielded, and we'll have to wait till we've made further progress on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we go to Tom in the Wirral?
Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Tom, hi.
My question is just, if we were to have another spike and we were to go into full lockdown, could the UK economy afford it, or would, I think, local lockdowns become the future of what we would expect?
Tom, that's a brilliant question, and that's really, I mean, you've really sort of summed up what I was trying to say just now. I think that is, obviously you have to keep in reserve the ultimate tool of a national lockdown. You have to keep that in reserve. But look, nobody wants to do that ever again. I certainly don't. We won't if we can possibly avoid it, because you're right. It's the local whack-a-mole approach that is much more effective, and I say that without any prejudice towards moles. By the way, when I said the Mole Protection League got very cross when I said something about whack-a-mole. I love moles. Nothing wrong with moles, apart from the ones in Whitehall always leaking stuff. I'm very much pro mole, but what we're trying to do is locally crack down. So if you look at Leicester, was very difficult. Because it was spreading in parts of the community in ways that we couldn't initially see, but we've now got on top of it. The numbers are coming down. It's very encouraging what's happening now in Leicester. Kirklees, they did a really good job. They dealt with it. Across the, Weston-super-Mare, Ashford, some GP surgeries in Enfield, loads of places we've seen local operations moving in. There's an issue now in places like Rochdale, Oldham. But again, we're acting fast, we're acting on the spot, and the numbers are coming down. And we're taking new powers so as to be able to enforce local lockdowns. And just to say, look, this group of shops or whatever, this nightclub, well, they're closed already, of course. But things that are where we think, areas where we think that there are problems, we can take steps now very, very quickly. Obviously, working with the local authorities, but supervised by the Joint Biosecurity Centre. So you're right, Tom. The local approach is the way forward.
Yeah, I mean, one of my concerns, I think, is how we control that, because I mean, I work for a hotel just on the border of Wales. We are classed as Wales, so at the moment we're still closed.
Where are you?
Just in Newlow, in Buckley.
You're in the Wirral. I see. Cool. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I live just in the Wirral, so that's where I drive. So what my concern is that a lot of people in that area are driving 2 minutes down the road to the pubs that are open in England, and how can we control? Like, for instance, Leicester, as a town was obviously closed down, so how do we control people just going out anyway and going across to a pub which isn't in that area? Yeah. Well,
I mean, I think one of the issues in Wales is that they can't drive more than 5 miles. So, or I think that was the rule.
Yeah, until Monday.
Until Monday, yeah. And I think that has put some pressure. But look, we've just all got to be careful and stay alert. And I went to the pub on Saturday, and it was great. But it was everybody was really, really scrupulously following the guidance, and I hope everybody will continue to do that. We do that, then we've got a fantastic chance of slowly getting the economy going again over the summer. keeping it down, and then being in a good position for the colder months. And that's what we've really got to think about, because it's going to be the winter where we're really going to have to be on it, because that's when you bet you're going to get flu, you're going to get real problems of general public health, and there's a risk that the virus will come back again anyway. So it's so important now to make real progress in driving it down, and now perfecting the local lockdown strategy.
Sorry, Prime Minister, just one last thing. Is there a particular threshold as to where we would go into lockdown? So obviously Leicester was 135 to 100,000 when we went into lockdown. There's isolated incidents where there's the meat factory where everyone kind of, it wasn't in a larger community. Is there a threshold where we would look to?
No, well, I mean, we're not in Leicester it was up to 137 cases per 100,000. In Germany they have a very strict rule. It's 50 cases per 100,000. We're being a bit more flexible. We're looking at the speed of transmission in the area. We're looking at which way it's going, and so we're taking individual decisions in individual cases. But it's about that kind of order. When you're up at 137 cases per 100, then then you've obviously got an issue, and it was right to go into lockdown. The crucial thing is to be able to detect it fast enough, and to be doing enough local testing so that it flashes up on your dashboard in time, and you can apply the targeted local lockdown. So we're not setting a precise threshold. We're looking at the speed of transmission, what's actually happening in the area, and applying local solutions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we go last question to Joe in Lincolnshire? So they're telling me to shut up and wind up, but you've got to have your question. Come on.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I know you've touched on mental health already.
Yes.
I work in a local secondary school. I've got primary age children. I just want to know what the Education Department plans for mental health support for the schools going back to school in September, basically after going back after lockdown.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for what you're doing, and obviously we're very concerned that the most important thing is that parents, teachers, pupils need to feel safe. They need to know it's safe, and it will be safe in September. And we will be setting, and you can see the guidance about how to make it work. And I know that many pupils are already back and having a great time in school. I want to see, as I was saying earlier on to Bethany, I want to see more pupils back in school now, and I want to see everybody back in September. And I think that will, in mental health terms, I think that will have a massive beneficial effect. I do think that people have suffered. Some people have loved it. I mean, let's be honest, some people have absolutely loved it, but some people have really found it tough in lockdown. And so that's why we're supporting mental health charities in the way that I mentioned, supporting mental health care across the board. But we will also be doing a lot over the summer to support kids who've fallen particularly behind, who need help. We're putting £1 billion in catch-up funding for kids who find it tough and being able to get the education that they need. I think about 650 million of that is for the schools to spend at their discretion, and then 250 million is for one-to-one tutoring for kids pupils who specially need it. And I think that will help with all sorts of things. I think it will help with their mental health needs. I also think it will help pupils who have fallen behind, but also finding talent in young people and finding potential in young people that might otherwise be missed. I'm an absolute believer in one-on-one tutoring, a more one-on-one engagement between teachers and pupils is something I think we should be investing in massively, and I think that will help with mental health outcomes and educational outcomes generally.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe, and thanks everybody very much for watching this edition of People's PMQs. That's all we have time for today. In fact, I've run over. And thank you all very much. You're all still listening. Fantastic. Thank you very much for tuning in, and thanks to everybody who's been watching at home. I think you'll have heard our basic messages about what we're trying to do to contain the virus. I think we've been, broadly speaking, very successful so far in depressing it, but we have to keep going, and we have to continue to maintain the guidance, social distancing, washing our hands, and that's the way we'll get through it. I do want people to start to go back to work now if you can, but remember to obey the guidance, because that is the way also to save lives. Thank you all very much for watching, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
We are going to unite and level up, bringing together the whole of this incredible United Kingdom, taking us forward, unleashing the potential of the whole country.
Hi folks, so welcome to another edition of People's PMQs.
We'll work flat out to give this country the leadership it deserves, and that work begins now.
We will make America great again.